Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the third and final night of our three-part series of breeding webinars. My name is Aisling Molloy, and I'm working alongside Martina Harrington and James Milan on the Future Beef programme, which is Teagasc Suckler Demonstration Farm programme. We have 23 commercial suckler beef farms, and they're spread right throughout the country. And the aim of the programme is to demonstrate how you can make your farm more profitable through efficiency by also reducing your impact on the environment. The programme is sponsored by 10 meat processors, and I would like to thank them sincerely for their continued support. The last two Tuesday nights, we've heard about the essentials when preparing for breeding and breeding the ideal cow by matching bulls to cows based on their genetic traits. Tonight, we're going to hear from Dr. David Kenny, who's the head of the Animal and Bioscience Department in Teagasc, to tell us about the research and best protocols for synchronising beef cows and heifers, along with using sex semen to achieve the best conception rates. Vet Daire Markham joins us from County Roscommon, where he runs his own company, vetembryos.ie. Daire has over 15 years' experience, and he currently flushes around 300 donors and implants over 750 embryos per year, so he'll be telling us the details of the embryo transfer process. And Fraher, who is a technician in Teagasc Kildalton and runs his own 50-cow commercial suckler herd, is also featured on the webinar. And he'll talk us through his experience with using sex semen and AIing for over 20 years in Kildalton, where the cattle are brought to finish, and in his own herd where he's producing weanlings for export. And as we go along, if you have any questions for us, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So we're going to start off by sharing a presentation and just talking through the different topics. We'll be asking questions as we're going, and as I say, please feel free to add them in. So just to acknowledge our sponsors there on the first slide. So I suppose if we look at synchronization, there's a lot of farmers in the Future Beef programme using synchronization to help them out, I suppose, in terms of a labour side of things, to reduce workload, maybe to induce heat in some of their non-cycling cows to try and tighten up their breeding season, to increase the use of AI. They might be trying to breed replacements there, and also as well as compacting your breeding season, trying to compact the calving season as well. And it also helps to reduce the number of bulls that they need there on the farm. So, David, I suppose if we start off with you, what exactly is estrus or heat synchronization?
Thanks, Aisling. So I suppose, as the name suggests, you're trying to manipulate, the normal 3-week cycle, essentially, we'll say, of a cow or a heifer, okay? And ideally, we'll say synchronize maybe a bunch that they're all coming on heat, more or less, and are eligible for breeding at the same time, which obviously has, benefits in terms of the management of those animals, assembly for AI, and I suppose the predictability, essentially, of the subsequent calving, would say, period. And I suppose just a key note to make is that while you're using synthetic hormones to mimic, I suppose, natural hormones that the cow has herself, or the cow or heifer, there are no negative implications for subsequent heats afterwards. So it's really just a point in time kind of intervention. I suppose in terms of conception rates, then what can we expect? It's like everything, once it's done properly, in conjunction with, say, with your veterinary surgeon in terms of advice, you could expect, would say, with heifers, that are cycling already. Now, that's a key point to make. I suppose any of the recommendations we're making there, we're assuming that these heifers are well grown for age, they're mature enough, and that they're already they've gone through puberty, and that I suppose they're already, would say, undergoing normal, 3-week heat cycles. So in that context, you could expect, would say, anything from 65, 70%, even, slightly higher than that at times, for a group of heifers that you might submit to a synchronization protocol. And for cows, again, somewhere, would say, in the region, would say, of between 50 maybe and 65%. Again, it'll depend on whether those cows were already undergoing cycles or not. And we know, Aisling would say there, that for your average suckler cow in moderate body condition, it takes probably anything from, 6 to 10 weeks, essentially, would say, for that cow to resume normal heat cycles again after calving. So the earlier that cow can come back into normal heat cycles, and ideally that she's already cycling, would say, when you start a synchronization program, the better the results and the higher the pregnancy rate that you can expect. And we do see, I suppose, a positive, I suppose, relationship, essentially, between, how long the cow is calved, would say, before you start the synchronization program, and the success rate or the conception rate, would say, to a synchronized AI, essentially. And obviously, would say, as I said already, would say, it's important to have those cows in, gaining body condition score at that time too. And then why might you consider implementing a synchronization regime in, either on the entire herd or in cohorts within the herd, essentially. Well, obviously, labor is a key one, and any surveys, or any, I suppose, interactions and open days that we have with farmers would say, and you might ask them, why do they use AI or not use AI, more to the point. Like most farmers will agree that, AI is a great tool to improve, I suppose, the genetic merit of the herd, to allow them to use different bulls, to balance, would say, traits, would say, on cows, or indeed use it, would say, specifically for easy calving, would say, in their heifer replacements. But labour, is a big one that's always mentioned. The amount of work involved in, regular heat cycles. So essentially, if you want to detect, 80–90% of your cows on heat, you really need to be looking at them 3 times a day, for probably anything up to a half an hour on each occasion. And that's, I suppose, with the part-time nature of beef farming, it's not feasible on many farms. And heat synchronization offers a tool to allow you to circumvent that, and to be able to get your, high proportion of your animals, would say, on heat at a time that suits you, and that you can plan that well in advance. Obviously, it can potentially induce heat as well in non-cycling cows. And we know, we'll say, from our own work and scanning thousands of cows, we'll say, from various studies, that, at the start of a typical breeding season, anything up to 50% of the cows may not be cycling. So if you have, already in maybe an extended calving cycle, would say, and, which obviously emanates from maybe a long 10–12 week, would say, breeding season, and you want to tighten up, I suppose, would say, your subsequent calving season, it does allow you, would say, to maybe bring forward, would say, some of those very late calving cows. Obviously, would say its primary use is to increase the use of artificial insemination. I think there's a role for AI in every herd, whether that be breeding high quality maternal replacements for the herd, whether it be, would say, particular cohorts, would say, that you want to use, would say, a different breed of bull, for example, would say, match I suppose, the traits of the cow, or indeed, which is probably most suitable for, is to specifically choose bulls with high reliability proofs for easy calving on your heifers, to minimize calving difficulty in your heifers. And we know that, for example, would say the incidence of dystocia or calving difficulty is at least 4 times as high in a maiden heifer as it is in a mature cow, and 2 to 3 times as high in a maiden heifer as a second calver. Shortening the breeding season, as I mentioned already, and the calving season, it really, would say, comes into its own from that perspective, because obviously the shorter the breeding season is, all else equal, if you get good conception rates, the shorter the subsequent calving season is again. And again, it's a labour issue, and I suppose the last one there, reduction in the number of bulls. When you look at, I suppose, the average suckler herd in Ireland, somewhere in the region of 15–16 cows, it's very hard to justify any more than one bull. Whereas you have a number of different cohorts of animals. You have, I suppose, your mature cows, you have your first and second calvers, where you need to be targeting, would say, bulls with good reliability for easy calving, and obviously, as I mentioned already, your maiden heifers there. So, I suppose, as I say, there's a role for AI in every single herd, and maybe, farmers could particularly, would say, targeted for their maiden heifers, and maybe the early calving, would say, more fertile cows in the herd from which they want to breed the next crop of replacement heifers.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. And that leads us on really nicely to the protocols that are available for the beef heifers. So a lot of this would be from research and from both national and international, and be the best practice protocols, I suppose. We'll have the heifers first and then the cows. So do you mind talking us through the one for the heifers first?
Yeah, so if we take I suppose, the 3 yellow boxes at the top, I think these are, really important, I suppose, caveats or points that we need to base any, I suppose, reproductive intervention, would say, any management strategy on. So the first thing, as I mentioned already, the well-grown heifer. So again, you want heifers, Aisling, that are, as I say, well-grown for age, good weight for age. You're probably targeting something in the region of about 60% of their mature body weight. So if you're talking about, we'll say, an animal that's, 700 kilograms, would say, mature, and that'll obviously, differ according to the breed, would say, type. But you're talking about a heifer, would say, maybe 420, 430, 440 kilograms, would say, at, 40 and 50 months of age. And we do know, would say there, that, those heifers that, that have I suppose, a constant rate of gain, that don't get a check, they, and particularly that are well grown for age at 8 to 9 months of age, they are typically the ones that are have undergone puberty and are cycling at the start of the breeding season. So it's very, very important to make sure that you're getting good rates of gain. Would say not you don't need to be feeding them ad libitum meal or anything like that, but that they're gaining, would say 0.6, 0.7 kilograms a day. Would say throughout the winter, and prior to that close to a kilo, would say while they're on the cow and in the post weaning period. They must be cycling ideally. Obviously, if you want to, you want to get high conception rates, if you want to get that kind of 70% plus conception rates to AI that we mentioned in the previous slide there, those heifers need to be pubertal. They need to be sexually active. They need to be undergoing normal 3-week cycles. And a bit like what I mentioned there, would say for the cow that's cycling again after calving, those are the animals that you expect to get those higher conception rates from. Okay, you will induce in any bunch of heifers, a small proportion that haven't already undergone puberty into heat, would say, but you won't get high conception rates, would say, from those. So as I say, try to manage them in a way that those animals, would say, are cycling, would say, 14, 15 months of age at the start of the breeding season. And as I mentioned earlier, would say, goes without saying, easy calving bulls. We can't be in any way greedy with our heifers. I would say, use bulls with high proofs for, reliable bulls, tested bulls for easy calving. And ideally, I would also say that you need to watch the myostatin status, would say, of the bulls that you're using as well. And I would go for trying to minimize the incidence. And I know it was talked about in a previous webinar. The incidence of myostatin, would say, in mutations in the actual calf that's going to be born. So bulls ideally with no myostatin mutations. And I think on the slide there, would say it's outlined a simple protocol. There's lots of different protocols out there for heifers as there are for cows. Some with the heifers, would say there you can either use a prostaglandin-based regimen, which is outlined here, which is probably the cheapest, would say, overall. Again, only works on heifers that are already cycling. If you go into a bunch of heifers and a number of them haven't, they're backward for their age, they're not undergoing normal 3-week cycles, they haven't, I suppose, sexually matured, well, then prostaglandin won't work. It's no use. Okay, so we're assuming here that we have a bunch of heifers that are cycling normally, and you have many options, but the one here, would say, that's outlined here, works very, very well at farm level. It's minimizes the cost, and if we could take, you could take maybe at the start of the breeding season, for argument's sake, that you'd watch the heifers there, for the first week or so, detect on heat. Obviously, you need to have aids to heat detection, so you need tail paint. Maybe even a teaser bull, vasectomized, would say, a teaser bull with a chin ball harness works exceptionally well. If that suits, would say, the herd management protocol. But certainly some kind of heat detection aids. At the end of that 7-day period, those heifers that you haven't observed in heat and that haven't been AI'd, they could be administered with prostaglandin. Okay, there's lots of different commercial, I suppose, synthetic versions of that, would say, available. Obviously, talk to your veterinary surgeon, would say, in terms of advice for that. And you'd expect that, somewhere between 3 and 5 days, that in any cohort, would say there, that about 50% of those heifers should show heat. And you AI them as normal. So obviously you wait, would say, for your normal AM, PM rule, would say there, and you AI as normal. The other cohort then, that don't show heat, essentially, they can receive another injection about 10 to 11 days later after the first one. Okay. And you'd expect between the two of them that you'd have 80 to 90% of those heifers, once they're cycling at the start, bred. And I'd expect to get, 70%, would say, plus conception rate, would say, in that type of a regimen. So that allows you then to get a lot of your heifers bred at the start of the breeding season, which is really important because those are the animals that are typically as first calvers the following year. They're going to take that bit longer to come back cycling again, would say, and to get back in calf. So you should target to try to get those bred at the start of the breeding season to give them that bit of latitude or, I suppose, time, as first calvers later on, because they will, typically slip a little bit compared to the main cow herd. Okay.
Thanks, David. And I just see a few questions coming in there as we're chatting as well. So as we move on to the cow protocol, I suppose, where can you get these hormones? Can they be bought commercially, or does it have to be through your vet?
Oh, absolutely, through your vet. They're all prescription-only medicines. So you need to engage with your vet. Your vet will be well trained, would say, in all these protocols, and can give you the best advice in the use of them. Because again, as I say, there are different options out there. There's probably you know, we've worked, would say, and developed a number, would say, of options, and we'll talk maybe a bit now about the one for beef cows, where we've done an awful lot of work. We've engaged a lot with, I suppose, private veterinary practitioners around the country in terms of training sessions, would say, on that, and discussed, would say, the pros and cons of different, you know, synchronization programs. But your vet is very well, you know, set up, would say, to advise you, would say, on any of these, and equally, would say, if you need to conduct, would say, obviously scans, would say, of cows that are late cycling or whatever it might be, obviously your vet is the person to call for that. So this is I suppose, a regime, Aisling, that we developed, would say, there after, I suppose, a lot of work on commercial farms in Ireland, throughout the entire island. There wasn't a county in the island of Ireland that we didn't have herds on in this particular study. There was 2,500 cows, more or less, would say, there across something like 60 or 70 herds, you know, that were enrolled in the study. And, you know, we went in, we worked with farmers, would say, anything from 10 cows upwards, you know, so we had herds there that are only 10 cows, with herds at 100 cows. And some of the prerequisites, I suppose, before those cows were enrolled, would say, onto the study were, number one, that they were at least 35 days, you know, so 5 weeks calved. And the main reason for that is you want the womb, would say, or the uterus to have involuted or to come back more, it's healed itself and back to its kind of normal size, would say, after calving, okay? That they would be in good body condition score, you know, not excessively fat, but just in good condition, and ideally gaining fat reserves, would say, at that stage. And we also wanted to develop a program that minimized the number of handlings, because that obviously puts off farmers, would say. We see with some of our dairy colleagues, and particularly in the US, you know, very convoluted, would say, synchronization programs where there could be anything up to 5 or 6 handlings. You know, and that's fine when you have cows coming in for milking, you know, a number of times a day. But we're in suckler cows, and particularly, would say, on, you know, out farms, we wanted to, I suppose, develop a protocol that minimized the number of handlings, including the actual AI itself. So a typical one would be, and again, we're talking about using a progesterone pessary or device here, whether that be a PRID or a CEDAR, would say, you know, again, talk to your vet, would say, about the recommendations on that, but they both work equally well. You know, so you'd start off, would say, we have it designated here, would say, as day 0, would say, at the start. So you insert your progesterone device, would say, your PRID or CEDAR, into the animal, you know, and give it an injection, would say, of GnRH. And again, there's lots of commercial, I suppose, synthetic versions of that out there. Again, talk to your vet on those. So that's in situ then in the cow for 7 days. Okay, so let's say you put it in on a Monday morning, you know that the following Monday morning you're going to be taking it out again, okay, or removing it from the animal. Okay, at that stage, then the cow receives an injection of prostaglandin. Okay, and we have also ECG there. And that ECG, would say, farmers might know it, would say, particularly those that have sheep, would say, as PMSG, or pregnant mare's serum gonadotrophin, and that's typically the injection that's used, would say, with, you know, synchronizing, would say, or sponging sheep. Okay, it's the same injection. Now we looked at that, would say, as part of the program, the different, I suppose, programs we compared, and we found that it was beneficial, really, where you had cows maybe in slightly poorer condition, okay, or maybe cows that were maybe not quite as long calved. Okay. So it's an option there. It's one of the cheaper, I suppose, interventions in the program. So then after that, would say, you record heats as normal. Okay. So for the next 2 to 3 days, would say, you expect, would say, your cows to come and heat. And your AI is normal. You're again using your AM PM rule. Okay. So that's, you know, the caveat that you're using conventional semen. And then in any synchronization program, you may well get a cohort that will not show heat, okay, or that you don't detect on heat. So you can submit those then, would say, at 72 hours, in other words, 3 days after you remove the PRID and you give the prostaglandin injection, you know, for what we call a timed AI. So all those animals that haven't already been bred can be subjected, would say, or put forward for AI, okay, and they receive at the time of AI then another injection, would say, GnRH, okay. Or a GnRH analog, or it's another, again, talk to your vet, would say, about the different commercial versions of that. And so essentially what you're doing is then you have a facility here, would say, an option here to breed all of the cows that you initially treated with your progesterone device, okay? And then I suppose after that, what do you do, would say, with repeats? So you're expecting all your cows then, you know, to start coming on heat again, anything from 17, would say, to probably 22, 23 days, would say, after they were initially eyed. Okay, as normal would be the case. So what a lot of farmers would have done would say in our trials would be, and there would have been stock bulls available, would say on most of these farms, they would turn in their stock bull maybe at 10 days after the cows are AI'd. And the bulls then would say would pick up, those cows to repeat. Okay. Or indeed, if you don't have a bull, you could obviously would say watch those for heat and AI them would say as normal again. So in those herds, when we looked at I suppose the conception rate of taking the initial timed AI or the synchronization or timed AI plus the repeats that were picked up by the bull or subsequent AI, we found that in 3 weeks, in that 3 week period, those farms on average would say had 80% of their cows in calf. Okay. And that's, within the context of the fact that 50% on average of those cows weren't cycling at all at the start of the program. Okay. So you can see then the power of, I suppose, synchronization, would say, when it's done properly, to tighten up, would say, the calving period, would say, in a herd, or indeed bring forward, would say, maybe some of those stragglers, or indeed what you can do then, if you combine that, would say, with synchronization in your replacement heifers, you can decide maybe to cull those very late calving cows. And there's lots of studies that have looked at that, would say, and it's a very effective way of, I suppose, tightening up overall, would say, the calving, the subsequent calving period.
Brilliant. And two quick fire questions for you, David, and we'll move on to the sex semen. Are conception rates higher by doing the fixed time AI or by working off of a standing heat? That's the first one.
Always, Aisling would say the standing heat.
Okay. Why is that?
So the timed AI is really there, would say, as I suppose, a facility more or less to capture a proportion of those cows that haven't shown heat for whatever reason, and try and get those pregnant. You wouldn't expect the conception rates in that cohort, would say, which it will be maybe, might be 20% of the cows or less that don't show heat. You wouldn't expect the same conception rate maybe quite as high in those as you would in those that show the normal heat to it.
That makes sense. And second question that we're always asked, if you're synchronizing 80% of them, within that short window of time, are they all going to calve on the same day?
No, that's for sure. And like there's lots of studies would say we followed up would say with a lot of herds on that particular large study we conducted ourselves with suckler cows, and there's lots of studies equally published would say with dairy cows, and would say you did 20 or 30 cows just for argument's sake, and they became pregnant. You wouldn't expect on average any more than about 10% of them to calve on any one day. So that's going to be spread out over while they were all bred the one day and it was very synchronous. The actual calving would say will be, it'll be very tight relative to a situation where you don't use synchronization, but at the same time there will be a spread. And again, it'll depend on the gestation length of the bulls that you're using, would say, and other factors.
David, that's absolutely brilliant. We're going to move on now to the sex semen side of things. And Billy, I'm just going to bring you in here. I suppose just to lead in from the synchronization. Have you used any synchronization in Kildalton in the past?
No, we haven't used any synchronization so far. We're using it. This is the first year we're using it on our heifers.
Brilliant.
But we haven't used it on the cows. But we used sex semen with the last couple of years, all right, last year and the year before.
Brilliant.
And
Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we got mixed results from the sex semen. I've used it at home and got on very well with it. But I've used it in the college on the heifers last year and didn't get on so good. The reason we had for that is our crush is about 5 minutes away from where we store the semen in a tank, and we were bringing the straws out in a tawn flask to the crush, and we reckoned that was some of the problem. They were too long in the tawn flask. But this year now we're going to take the flask out to the crush, and when we're synchronizing them, and we're going to use it at the crush, thaw them out at the crush. So hopefully we get better results this year. But other than that, like I find the sex semen very good. Using it at home, I've gone very well with it. But as I said, we haven't got great results in the college with it the last year now because of that. But as well as that, we use just the one bull, and it is recommended that you use a couple of bulls where you could meet one bull, and it's straws from one bull could be just a bit dodgy, maybe mightn't be as good as you think they were. And if you use a pool of bulls, you might get on better, like.
Absolutely. And in terms of the heifers and the cows that you're picking, how do you select them?
We pick our better milking cows. Cows that produce the best calves, usually we pick them ones for breeding replacements. And we go by the ICBF and the high Eurostars as well, so replacement values. We pick usually cows over 140 Eurostar replacement value. they're the cows we pick for replacements. And we use cemental bulls and limousine bull on them for our replacements. And we pick bulls in with high value for milk as well.
So that's kind of your replacement policy in the college.
That's the
And
replacement policy, yeah. We pick out 25 cows every year out of the 50 to breed replacements, and the other 25 cows then go with a Terminal bull, a Charolais bull we use.
fantastic. And I suppose if we're looking at any of the research kind of coming out, and if the recommendation is that any for the heifers, fair enough, but for any of the cows, that they're over 35 days calved, they've cycled at least once, and David has really emphasised that, and that again they're on a good plane of nutrition too. But David, I might just bring you in here just to explain to us. So this is kind of the timing, I suppose, of when you should inseminate with a conventional straw versus a sex straw. Why is the window so narrow? And I suppose why are the conception rates that bit less than conventional?
Yeah, well, I suppose the key thing is, in the sexing process, the semen is actually passed through lasers, and you're I suppose trying to do, the technology essentially is detecting about a 3% difference in DNA content, more or less, would say, between the male bearing sperm, would say, and the female bearing sperm. And that process, of passing it through that laser, through that machine, essentially, it does, I suppose, damage the sperm to some extent. Okay, and we know that I suppose the product in the sex product is more fragile by its nature. It still works, potentially extremely well, but at the same time, it isn't as robust, we call it. The sperm, would say, within a sex straw aren't as robust, would say, as they would be from I suppose, an unconventional, or sorry, conventional semen straw. And the other thing is, obviously, would say the number of sperm, would say, within the straw is only about a fifth, would say, of what would be in a normal, in a normal conventional straw as well, an unsexed straw, Aisling. So because of that, then, it won't last as long in the heifers of the cows, the females' reproductive tract. So that's why you want to delay, I suppose, the timing of the eye that's closer to the timing of ovulation, or when the cow actually releases the egg. Okay, whereas in a conventional straw, the sperm within that, they're more fitter, would say, they can last longer, and it's not quite as big a deal. Now, even obviously, would say, with conventional, there's a window there that you want to, ideally, would say, the AMP rule, as I mentioned already, ideally before, 18 hours, would say, but with the sex straw, you would delay it, would say, beyond, would say, the normal kind of AMP rule to try to, I suppose, ensure that you have viable sperm there when the cow releases the egg.
Perfect. And there's just a comment in here as well that the semen in the thawing flask should make no difference if it's left there for 2 hours at 35 degrees. It's the same thing as being in the cow. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
No, definitely not. And I'm sure Daire will comment as well, will say that, it's imperative that you have a short, that the temperature, that the semen is very, it's very sensitive to thawing temperature. There's a very narrow, I suppose, window, would say, within which, you should have your thawing flask at, in terms of the temperature of the water. And, get that straw into the cow as soon as possible.
I would agree with you on that one, David. One of the items that we use here quite regularly is a gun warmer. Not every farmer would have that, but certainly there's, especially when it comes to the sex semen, I would strongly advise technicians even just to consider purchasing a gun warmer. You take the straw from the tank, you thaw it, you load it into your straw, put your straw and your gun into your gun warmer, and immediately from the gun warmer straight into the cow, absolutely no delay whatsoever, would be a strong recommendation.
Perfect. And I think, like, you're conscious of that, Billy, and you kind of have that plan in place for next year. Probably not on the gun warmer level, but it's a good suggestion there as well. But that the flask will be that bit closer to the crush for AI for this year.
Yeah, we're hoping just get 30 seconds from the out of the thawing flask and into the heifer.
Yeah.
Last year it was 5 or 6 minutes, could have been. I think that was our problem last year, but hopefully now this should work this year.
And even actually, I go as far as to say, if you don't have an automated kind of, I suppose, thawing flask, that you're using a thermometer. So it's essentially the same thermometer you're using to check your temperature, would say, in your calves, would say, use that. And there's a narrow window there, ideally, would say, between about 35 and 37 degrees Celsius.
The idea to go with. That's brilliant, David. Thanks very much. I suppose just on the slide there as well, it has for anybody who is considering it yourselves that are tuning into the webinar this evening. These are just the recommended times of the onset of heat, or that kind of first standing mount, and when you should be timing your AI in relation to it. So I know a lot of people in the program, obviously they can't, their technician might be passing the yard once a day. So unless they're AI in themselves, this may not be an option. But I suppose the big thing is maybe if you have your cows picked out, and if the technician is there at the right time, that you're able to use your sex draw at that stage. So if we have a look at the embryo transfer then, and that's kind of linking in every embryo collection or transfer, that's what kind of linking in what we've talked about in terms of synchronization and the sex draws as well. So Daire, I might bring you in at this stage just to talk us through what the actual process of the embryo collection or transfer is, and what options that farmers have if they're looking at it for their own herd.
Okay, thanks, Aisling. Yeah, I suppose the first thing I would say on embryo transfer or ET work is that it's such a wide-ranging topic that we will skim over the surface of it. We won't kind of drill down too much in depth. I think it possibly would take a couple hours to go do that. So just on your slide there, there's two ways of embryos are either collected or generated. The MOT, or multiple ovulation and embryo transfer, is the standard, the kind of standard way in this country of collecting embryos. However, there is also IVF available as well. There's two very distinguished methodologies. The multiple ovulation and embryo transfer is what we would use here all of the time. However, we do also implant IVF derived embryos as well. For the multiple ovulation and embryo transfer, the cow undergoes a program for about 8 to 9 days, and she comes into heat normally, a good active heat. She's inseminated twice, and 7 days later, so say for argument's sake, if she's programmed to come in on a Monday, the embryo collection process then takes place the following Monday. The embryos are collected from the cow. It's a non-surgical method of doing it. They're collected from the uterus, and they're brought into the lab where they're sorted and processed. One of two things will happen. After that, they will be implanted fresh into a recipient animal, or they will be frozen, very similar to a semen straw, and can be stored for long or short-term duration. With the IVF-derived embryos, the oocytes are collected and they're fertilized inside in the lab. So the key difference is that the fertilization occurs inside in the cow, and with the IVF, it occurs outside of the cow. Irrespective of your method of deriving your embryos, the embryos to create a calf must go into your recipient. And when they're transferred into a recipient, either frozen and thawed or transferred in fresh, is then approximately 9 months later, you get your calves on the ground. I've just a couple of pictures there on the slide, and white dots are actually pictures of actual embryos taken down a microscope. A nice flush from a pedigree cow, and the image on the right hand side is actually from my own farm. Those 3 calves are all as a result of one flush. For any kind of Charlie breeders that are out there, they're all sired by Major. They're from a Gold Star Echo Dam, and they go back to a French imported cow. But all of those 3 calves that you see there were taken out of the donor on the one day and implanted into recipients and calf down later on down the line. The second point there is just about your breeder options as regards if you want to source embryos. Can you flush your own donor, or do you purchase an embryo and implant it? We would find a mix and match here in our business of what happens. We would have numerous clients that would flush their own donors. They'll implant their own embryos. They'll store their own embryos, or indeed they'll sell on some embryos as well. And then you'll have plenty of clients that wouldn't want to do the flushing process, but might only want to purchase one commercial embryo, one pedigree embryo, whatever it might be. And we facilitate that insofar as that the one client sells it, and we implant it for the clients as well. So irrespective of your source of embryos, it has to go into something, and that's into your recipient. Conception rates with those embryos there that we see on the image on the slide, the internationally accepted average is just a tickle over 50% for grade 1 frozen conventionally collected embryos. Now, we do run a specialized ET unit here, and our conception rates would be markedly higher than that, but it is a specialized unit, and we're here on a daily basis. So if we weren't exceeding international averages, I'd be disappointed with what we were doing here. the big question is always, how much does this cost? You can prepare a donor, put it through the drug program, and obviously our own fees as well, and you're looking at approximately €600 to flush a cow. So it is a significant investment in your herd. And one of the key things that I would kind of put across to clients, and I say it to all clients, is when I did my training over in the States, I had a really, really good professor training us, and I won't attempt to do an American accent, but one thing he said was sometimes the cows don't read the goddamn book. So you can do all of your preparation work correctly, you can administer your drugs correctly, you can AI your donor correctly, and sometimes they won't flush. And it is a key point to get out there that, they don't flush. However, a significant majority of them do flush. And when they do, you get your embryos. And again, there's a significant market out there for selling those embryos. There's a significant market out there for buying those embryos. And then there's a significant business as well for people implanting the embryos, be it into their own suckler herd for increasing the replacements in their herd, be it for imported genetics, be it to there's multiple reasons. Some people, we've had one or two clients that bought pedigree embryos that wanted to breed their own stock bull inside in their own herd because they had a closed herd. We have another client really, really worried about TB, so he actually protected his genetics by flushing one of his best cows, and we have his embryos sitting inside in the tank, and if there's a TB breakdown in the herd, he'll have his genetics to go back to. We're storing the embryos for him. We charge him a small fee for doing so. Everyone is happy that he has that backup. It's actually a she, sorry, pardon me. The potential risks then as well, I just kind of initially outlaid as regards the cost. So you can outlay the money to flush a heifer, flush a cow, and she may not give you embryos for you to work with. So your money is essentially, gone. The calving difficulties as well, we would kind of deal with all breeds from Angus, Charlie, Hereford, Speckled Parks, Sementals, every breed going, and the calving difficulty is certainly an issue in the heavier continental breeds. But as regards the lighter breeds such as the Angus, the Herefords, Speckled, etc., there's no issue with calving difficulty there above and beyond the normal parturitions in animals. So it's a really broad field of breeding. But one of the key things, no more than what David was saying earlier, what Billy was saying earlier, it's a tool, it's a reproductive tool, and it's been around for quite a while. It's been refined, but essentially the nuts and bolts of it are that you breed your best cow to your best bull to magnify, the genetic gain inside in your herd, or to accelerate the genetic gain inside in your herd. And there's quite a good demand for it. There's quite a good demand for it in Ireland and internationally as well. And we're quite happy to fulfill the need for that demand,
Brilliant, and thanks, Daire. And I think you summed it up very well for all the technologies that we are talking about tonight. Like, they are about maximising genetic gain within your own herd, and some of them might suit some farmers, but some of them aren't for everybody. And like that, there's risks with all of it as well. But as it turns out, Billy, you actually have a heifer at home that you're considering flushing this year. Will you tell us a little bit about her, and I suppose what you're hoping to get or to achieve from it?
Oh, what we're hoping to get anyway, yeah. We purchased a heifer there a couple of months ago. She's a 3/4 bred Belgian Blue, and 75% Belgian Blue, 25% Limousine, and she's out of Tattoo, and we're hoping to flush her now at the end of the year, and we hopefully get some eggs from her and implant those embryos into donor heifers, and hopefully we'll have one for Carrick and Shannon the following year. That's the aim, anyway. That's the aim.
Aim high.
Aim high.
Very good. And Daire, for somebody like Billy who hasn't done this before, but obviously has plenty of experience, what would your advice be in that situation?
Yeah, it's kind of nearly a life lesson more so than ET. It's walk before you can run. Say even just take a step back. The flushing process and recovering the embryos encompasses a lot of what Billy was talking about earlier, and an awful lot of what David was chatting about, insofar as kind of the administration of drugs, AIing, etc. But look at a couple of key points, Billy, when you're starting off on that. Number one, and crucially, is engage with your own vet. Is your fertility in your herd good? If your fertility in your herd is good, yeah, certainly, absolutely, embryo transfer ET work is something to consider. But really important to consider that it is not a tool it's not a tool to cure infertility. If the herd is infertile, ET is not the place to be going. in a situation like your own, Billy, and anyone that's ever thinking of kind of collecting embryos from their own donor, I would have one piece of advice, and it would be flush and freeze. There's enough to do when you're doing the process for the first time to make sure you get it right. So there's, you have your drug protocol, you have your AIs, and then obviously you have the collection of the embryos. Throw in an extra synchronization of 4, 5, or 6 recipient heifers up on top of that. Your workload increases quite a lot. And there's a danger that you fall between two stools. So any client that's starting off, I say, right, let's flush your donor, be it a heifer, be it a cow. Let's get our embryos, and then let's move on to the next phase. And quite a common strategy used by breeders is they'll actually flush their donor. They'll get their embryos. They might get 2 embryos, they might get 10 embryos, they might get 20 embryos, whatever it might be. But then sometimes they'll turn around again, and there's a 6-week window where you can repeat the process. So you could do it every 6 weeks. They'll turn around again and say, right, okay, I'm after flushing my heifer. I have 3 embryos, but I have 5 recipients lined up here. Can we go again in 6 weeks and synchronize our recipients to come into heat for the whole ET process? And we can, if the second flush does not go well, we have the backup of our own created frozen embryos in the tank ready to go. So you're guaranteed that your heifers will not be left open. So again, it takes a little bit of planning too, because if you were planning on flushing a heifer in April with this kind of process, you probably want to have and to do the 2 flush strategy, you would probably want to have your first flush done in the first week of February. So, move that along, and April and June is certainly an option. But the key piece of advice I would give to anybody is walk before you can run. And that's, critical.
Very good advice. And I just see some of the questions coming in here, and David is asking, does freezing embryos affect the conception rates then versus fresh?
From what we have found here, it does affect them, David, but it would drop them by less than 10% in our experience when the freezing process is carried out under very strict timing conditions. There's very, very little difference between the fresh and the frozen implants.
Very good. And that kind of nearly answers another question, but it was, what is the average conception rate of fresh transferred grade 1 embryos?
So fresh, and here, I sound like a politician. It's a great question, but it's a commonly asked question. If your recipient is a maiden heifer, that's your best recipient in terms of conception. Everything else works down from that. So if you're talking about conception rates of fresh grade 1 embryos into maiden heifers, if you put in 10 grade 1 embryos, you'd be disappointed if you didn't get 7 or 8 pregnancies out of it, all things being equal. So there's a very, very high conception rate with the fresh grade 1s. With the frozen grade 1s, all things being equal, the international average is 50%, but like I said, we very, very commonly hit higher averages than that.
Yeah, brilliant. And somebody else is asking, what price do embryos go for when you're buying? Probably how long is a piece of string?
How long is a piece of string? I mean, look at in recent auctions, we've seen embryos trade hands for over €1,000. But that's an impossible question to answer, because it's all to do with the genetic makeup of the donor and the sire. So it's wide ranging.
Perfect. That's fair enough. Billy, this is probably more of a comment towards you, but I AI a lot of cows with sex semen. I put the semen up the horn of the side of the cow, so the horn of the uterus, I'm assuming, is that she's in heat and that the egg is ovulated on, and I'm getting unreal results. So I suppose that's more of a comment. I suppose, David, have you anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think that questioner will say is very, very right. And again, a colleague of mine, Michael Diskin, would say I suppose normal conventional semen would say, 20 years ago did a really nice trial, and he looked at, would say, exactly as the question was put there, the deposition of the semen in the main body of the uterus, or indeed further up, would say, in either horn, and found, would say, probably an increase of about 5 to 6%, would say, consistently in terms of conception rate. So again, you're putting that semen, would say, that bit closer, would say, to the site of fertilization.
Which makes sense. That's okay.
I just add a comment on that one, actually. We would obviously AI quite a lot of cows here, and really good point made by David. However, if you pick the wrong horn, your conception rate will tank. Is it worth the 5%?
Yeah. But ideally, it would be you could put half the straw on either horn, I suppose. Daire would say would be because there's plenty of semen, plenty of sperm there, would say, for to do the job essentially.
Yeah, all you need is one. Isn't that what they say? Another comment or a question in there from Jared, is it better to give the GnRH a number of hours before AI?
Before AI, is it?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if that was to do with the synchronization or if you were just giving it in general.
Well, I suppose again it's down to the number of handlings and everything else. Aisling would say it works, quite well at the time of AI in its own right. Would say again there's a lag phase before it actually evokes. It's essentially just a tool to help with the ovulation process, the release essentially of the egg.
Of the egg, perfect. And of course, that ovulation takes place after kind of in general.
Yeah, there's a window then between before it actually has an effect.
Yeah, perfect. Another question on the sex semen. So for sex semen, how many hours do you inseminate after showing heat, or is it the same as conventional AI?
I think as we were alluding to there, Aisling, and you, I think, summed it up very nicely in your table there. Because it's a more fragile product, we'll say you need to delay that, I suppose, that insemination process to closer to when you expect the heifer to actually release the egg. So on average, it's probably about 6 hours, we'll say, after I suppose your optimum window essentially, we'll say, for conventional semen. So you're probably close to. We'll say, for example, the optimum window, we'll say, for conventional semen would be between kind of 12 and 18 hours. Okay, you're probably talking closer to 24 hours, we'll say, for your sixth straw. But again, it needs to be practical as well in terms of the time of day.
Perfect. There was another question in there on your side, Billy. What terminal bull are you using in Kildalton?
We have our own stock bull. We use our own Charlie stock bull. We're using him this year. We only purchased him in at the Christmas cracker there this year, and
Brilliant.
we're using him. He's gone out today, his first day out.
Super. The best of luck with him.
Hopefully it goes well.
And have you ever thought of using, so a lot of the time when we talk about sex semen, we talk about sex female. Have you ever thought about using sex male in the herd and going back with a replacement bull?
No, I haven't thought about it. We haven't used that. We haven't thought about doing that.
Yeah.
No. Well, we don't have any pure but Charlie cows here, so ourselves like to breed a Charlie bull off of.
Yeah. So it's no, that's fair enough. That makes sense. More questions there. Have you used? Oh yeah, a question in from Graham. So has used synchronization in both heifers and cows and worked well for spring calvers. Planning now to do in the shed on slats for autumn calvers and keep the bull off the slats. Any tips?
I suppose the big one would say with the autumn cow, any cattle on slats is just the lack or the lower incidence of heat activity. And we've shown that very clearly when we've done studies in the past. And again, I refer to my colleague Michael Diskin would say, who compared, I suppose, the number of mounts that a typical cow or heifer would get, would say, on slats versus on a straw bed and versus outside in a paddock. And you're talking about multiples. Would say, for example, it might be on average, 5 or 6 mounts, would say, in a cow on slats. It could be double to triple that, would say, on rubber meshed slats or indeed straw, and then multiples more, would say, outside. So it's that, I suppose, being able to detect the heat, would say, in the first place, Aisling, is so important, would say, there. And obviously that has an impact then on the timing of AI relative to the onset of heat.
Perfect. That's great, David. And I think there's a little bit of confusion, Daire, if you don't mind just clarifying. So I suppose what exactly the flushing is and what the superovulation is.
Okay, so the flushing, I'll deal with the two questions. So the first thing, superovulation, is the administration of FSH, a hormone, to the donor. And the idea of it is that on a normal cycle, a donor will only, the standard female will ovulate one dominant follicle per cycle. Obviously, in the case of twins, there'd be two. But with the follicle stimulating hormone that's administered to the donor, this will stimulate multiple dominant follicles to appear. So when you do inseminate the cow, you're fertilizing many follicles as opposed to the one. So that's called superovulation, and that's where the terminology comes from. The flushing terminology, when we flush a cow, we fill up the horns of the uterus with fluid and we collect it back. And the colloquial term is that it's flushed. So the horn is filled with fluid, and the fluid is taken back out and into a filter, and that horn then is considered to be flushed. And that term is kind of grown with ET work, kind of saying that the cow has been flushed. So it's essentially the recovery of embryos from the uterus of the cow 7 days post AI, if you want to be say technical about it.
That makes sense. And Billy, just for yourself, on the synchronization, I suppose, how are you going to manage it's the heifers you're synchronizing this year in Kildalton, isn't it?
It's the heifers we're synchronizing, yeah.
Yeah, how are you managing them in the lead up to before they're synchronized?
Yeah, well, we always have the heifers, aim to have the heifers 420 kilos before we start AIing them, have that weight. And they're turned out since the 1st of March there. They're out on good grass since then. And they're in good condition now. And so we're going to flush them now this week, or synchronize them this week, rather, sorry.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And a question actually came in there as well, David, in terms of the heifers. So I know we talked about the estromate protocol. Can you use a PRID was what was asked, but a progesterone device to synchronize heifers?
Yeah, absolutely, Aisling. You know, I suppose we just put up the estimate based or the prostaglandin based regimen there because it's probably the more I suppose cost effective. But again, it was with the caveat that your heifers are already they're sexually mature, they're already undergoing normal 3-week cycles. The PRID obviously works. This PRID or cedar would say works quite well as well. So you'd expect, regardless if it's done properly, you would expect similar. And if animals are bred on a proper heat, at the right time relative to when the onset heat occurs, similar responses, would say, in terms of conception rates. I suppose the PRID, would say, the progesterone based regime allows you, would say, then the potential of doing the timed AI because you have more control over, would say, the onset of heat.
That makes sense. And in terms of your heifers that you're doing this year, Billy, have you been keeping an eye on them to record heats as it is, or are all of them cycling at this stage?
Yeah, we've been watching them now since they went out, and I'd say 90% of them now have come in heat, yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's great. So you have dates for them now when you can kind of...
Yeah, we know when they were on heat there the last 3 weeks.
Fantastic. And obviously, like when we were going through the slide as well, from a cost point of view, being able to use the kind of estimate or the prostaglandin system is a lot cheaper than having to go with the progesterone device as well. And
Yeah, exactly.
a good weight. Just sticking with heifers as well, I'll give this one to you, Daire. What is the best breed, weight, and age of recipient heifers?
Breed, age, and weight, right? What we would typically use here would be a 420 kilo heifer as a recipient, and bred from the dairy herd, be it a Limousin cross, Aberdeen Angus cross, Hereford cross, Simmental cross, Charlie cross, whatever it might be. But again, for people who are doing it or thinking it, don't get too hung up on it. What you need is this heifer is going to have a calf in 9 months. What's she going to need? She's going to need milk. Aren't you as well to have it coming from the dairy herd as opposed to coming from a lower milk line? But it's your weight for age, it's your structure of your heifer, it's your size and shape of your heifer as well. You need depth of body, you need scope inside in the heifer. So there's a big difference between a 420 kilo heifer at 16, 17 months and a 420 kilo heifer at 13 months that's in a body condition score of 5 versus a body condition score of 3. So I would have no great preference from them. It's weight for age, body condition score. If you're purchasing heifers for it or you're going using heifers for it, a heifer in a fat score of 5 is a poor candidate. As equally is a heifer in a body condition score of 1 or 2. Going back to what David was saying about the fertility of your heifers, they need to be fertile. At the end of the day, their job here in this process is to become pregnant. They have to be fertile starting off with. And again, your management of your recipients is a very, very key thing. But again, it's no different to, again, what David was talking about, what Billy was talking about. Have you got your vaccinations done? Have you got your minerals done? Is the diet right? And again, anyone that's embarking on an ET kind of a process or journey, your first protocol is not to pick up the phone to myself or to our company. It's to pick up the phone to your own vet and get involved with your own vet and kind of say, look here, I'm thinking of doing this. What would you advise? Where do we start? And that will bring you on to your kind of age and breed, etc., of your recipient heifers. But fertility, size, and consultation with your own vet are crucial aspects of the process.
And I think even just when we're talking about heifers, like even the management of recipient heifers versus replacement heifers, it's all the same things. Again, it's nutrition, it's the weight for age, it's the fertility, milk, everything.
A lot of fundamental, I wouldn't even call them basic, fundamentals of beef breeding.
Perfect, that's grand. Just a question in, are more young farmers or older farmers involved in suckler farming interested in embryo transfer from your experience, Daire?
I'm seeing a wonderful mix of age groups coming through the doors. Billy mentioned about Carrick and Shannon there, the fat stock or wherever fat stock show and sales may be. There's a really interested cohort of young farmers who enjoy the experience. I think it's a really positive thing. They enjoy the experience of going to Carrick for the weekend, having a calf in Carrick, or even purchasing a calf in Carrick, or whatever a fat stock show and sale might be. So there's a certain social aspect to it as well that's come into it. But there are a lot of seasoned farmers doing it as well. Again, protecting their genetics in the case of a TB breakdown. Closed herds, they want to breed their own stock pool. They're purchasing a couple of pedigree embryos and putting them in that way. So we're seeing a wild and wonderful cohort of people coming through the door. But there's no one size fits all for any aspect of breeding, and the same applies for ET.
And another question coming in from Thomas here: is it better to transfer the embryo into a heifer with a natural heat or a synchronized heifer?
I love this one. Look at it, very, very, very common question. I suppose I throw that back with another question. If you have 8 heifers or 7 heifers or 6 heifers, whatever it might be inside in the pen, and they're all synchronized, or indeed they might be out in the field, how do you know which one is in heat? So what I'm finding that sometimes you get heifers submitted to you as part of a synchronization program, and I suppose here's a key point of it. Prior to us implanting the embryo, be it a fresh embryo or a frozen embryo, we scan the recipient to see which side has she ovulated on. Has she ovulated correctly? So that's our key metric when it comes to deciding if a heifer is suitable or not. And we know straight away if a heifer is out of cycle, if she's not on, she could be on day 10 or 12. We need them on day 6, 7, or 8. So the natural heat works really well because you have one heifer or one cow, whatever it might be, in heat, in a group. It's a very, very obvious heat versus having 5, 6, 7, or 8 heifers in action together, and you're not quite sure, is actually one of them in heat, or is she, active because the rest of the pen are active? So it's a common question. Natural heats work really, really well because the heifer is definitely identified as being in heat versus the group kind of situation.
And can you use sex semen with the embryo transfer process?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I refer back to what Billy was saying earlier. So different bulls, their semen sexes differently. You will get some really, really, really potent sexed semen from some bulls, and some reasonably poor quality after going through the sexing process. And you'll see that across the board when it comes to inseminating heifers. Now, I mentioned earlier, during the part of the protocol, the donor needs to be inseminated twice, once in the morning, once in the evening with standard semen. If you're using sexed semen, and on the program that we use is actually 3 inseminations in it, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, and 1 in the middle of the day with sex semen. And that's to allow for the fact that the sex semen, as David has said earlier, has undergone treatment. It's not as the lifespan of it isn't quite as long, and more importantly, there's less sperm cells inside in the straw as well. We talk about normal conception rates in outside of ET. It just takes 1 sperm cell to hit home. If you have a donor that's ovulating over the course of 24 hours, you need to have a fairly active semen cohort working its way through there. So sex semen is used. Once you get the embryos from the flush using sexed semen, there is no difference in conception rate with them whatsoever. However, you will expect that the numbers of embryos recovered, or the number of grade 1 or grade 2 embryos recovered that you can work with, can be a little bit less than when you're using standard semen. But again, if it's the females that you're after, which is 99% of the sex semen is used for ET work is for the females. But when it's the females that you're after, it's an acceptable risk to
Sorry, I know it's coming close to 9 o'clock, but we have a lot of questions coming in here. What's your, this question is probably linked to that, opinion on the long life sperm vital straws?
I wouldn't have had any kind of particular dealings with them, so I'd probably pass that question across to either Billy or to David.
Yeah, I think this is a commercial product. Aisling, again, we have done no work specifically on it, but it's a commercial product that there's a particular chemical added, would say, to the semen, would say there that in theory, will say delays the release of the sperm once post insemination of the cow. So there's a school of thought would say, and again, as I say, I have no data would say to support this. We do not work with it, that it might extend the life, would say, of the sperm. So in other words, that it allows maybe a longer window, would say, for if from the time in terms of the timing of AI. But again, as I say, I have no data. We haven't done any work with it.
Have you used any of it in Kildalton or at home, Billy?
No, I haven't used any of it. No.
No, that's all right. Question for you as well. Would collars, though, I presume any of the automated heat detection systems, be a better option than synchronization? I'll let you answer that either for your own herd or for Kildalton.
Yeah, the synchronization, the collars are a good job. We've used them here on the dairy herd now, and we find them very good.
Yeah.
You have the exact time even for the sex semen. You get your window there when to use the sex semen. If it doesn't suit, we'd say, if it's the middle of the night or something, it doesn't suit, you go to conventional semen. Whereas you have the option, like if it's in the daytime, to use the sex semen.
And have you considered using the collars in the beef herd?
We have, yeah. Yeah, we're hoping to get collars probably next year now in the beef herd.
Very good, very good. That's fair enough. Sorry, there is a heap of questions here. Can you reuse a recipient, for example, carried an embryo pregnancy already, had a C-section and is rearing her embryo calf, came back into heat and is bulling every 21 days since the section? Could you scan and reuse to carry another embryo?
The short answer, Aisling, is yes. I'll put an asterisk beside it, okay? And the asterisk beside it is your conception rate. Your best conception rate is out of your maiden heifer. Everything is a lesser percentage from that. Throw in a cesarean on top of that. Again, it's a slightly lesser one. So if the black and white answer is yes, what's your risk profile there on that? Will they go pregnant? Yes, they will, but your conception rate will be reduced.
Okay. Question for David. Can you just try the prostaglandin injection with the cows?
Yeah, absolutely. If the cows are undergoing normal cycles, as I was saying earlier, Aisling, would say the prostaglandin is of no value, would say, if you're either, I suppose, your heifers aren't sexually mature and undergoing normal 3-week cycles, or indeed your cows haven't resumed normal cyclicity after calving. So it's a tool for cows, would say, that are cycling normally, but equally within a normal 21-day cycle, the first 5 days or so it doesn't work, and equally would say the last 4 or 5 days it doesn't work either. So there's a window in between with which it should induce, would say, heat.
Brilliant. And that's where your 2 shots every 11 days.
Precisely, exactly. You're trying to to use Jara's word risk. You're trying to minimize the risk, would say, essentially, would say, of it not working. By having that, I suppose, using a bit of science, would say, in terms of trying to estimate, would say, the interval properly.
Perfect. And Billy, in your case, like for trying to get, I suppose, the first calvers back cycling, naturally they're going to take a little bit longer to get them back in heat. Do you manage them any different in Kildalton versus the cows?
Yeah, in Kildalton, when we get the first calvers, we try and get them out to grass straight away. And this year now we prioritise the first cows. We haven't put them with the suckler cows at all. We put the heifers with the heifers. And these first cows then are getting the best of grass, and hope to get them back in good condition and get them back in calf fast again. But they need extra attention, especially when they're calving at 24 months. You have to be kind to them the whole way through. As I said, having 420 kilos going to the bull, and being starting AI at that stage at 420 kilos, and you have to mind them up along and be pushing them the whole time.
Absolutely. It's back to that plain nutrition again, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Daire, how much would it cost? How much would it cost to someone who's starting out doing embryos to do 8 to 10 heifers? Somebody's going to be busy.
Again, this is, it's I love these impossible questions. There's a transfer fee per embryo. The transfer fee per embryo is about €75 plus VAT. So, multiply that by 8 or 10. But then, are you flushing your cow, or are you just purchasing embryos? Is it the cost of the embryos? Is it the cost of the flushing? So there's multiple facets to that particular question. Nigh on impossible to answer. But there's a fee for all kind of actions that happen. But to get your embryos, you're probably looking at about €600 to flush your cow. And then after that, every other fee kind of comes in on top of it. Are you going purchasing? What kind of angle are you taking with that? And also don't forget going back to David's previous point as well, these 8 to 10 heifers, if you're going to be synchronizing them, there's a synchronization cost of the heifer as well, which I think it was on the slide there for approximately €30 if you're synchronizing as well. So it's a multifaceted answer, but those are the nuts and bolts of it.
Perfect. And if you're buying an embryo, I suppose, where would you actually go to buy an embryo?
Look, I pick up the phone and ring any breeder that does ET work, and they'll have embryos stored of a particular breed. I won't be so crass as to plug my own pedigree Charlie herd if you're looking for a Charlie bull. But no, seriously, there are many breeders around the country that are flushing their donors, you know, be it with ourselves or other companies. Pick up the phone, ring them, you know, see what's out there, and indeed there are many online platforms as well where they're traded as well. So yeah, there's no shortage of access to embryos.
Perfect. And what's the cost of implanting one then if you were to buy one?
It's the €75 plus VAT is the implant.
€75 plus VAT. Perfect. That's okay. There was just a few other questions there about getting the recipients back in calf. We covered that. Better conception rates implants from fresh embryos as opposed to frozen. So you were saying about 10% less conception rate with the frozen versus
approximately. Again, Aisling, you know, I love the expression all things being equal, you know.
Yeah, that's okay. The one other question I've used, I'll show this open to Ollie. I've used sex semen but found deformation in the calves. Has anyone experienced that?
No, I haven't experienced that anyway.
Okay.
That would be, to my mind, more of a veterinary question than to anything to do with semen.
So it could be, it's more genetic, I suppose, from actual stroke.
Pathological, I suspect, yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. And just one other question, Daire, that came in on the last week's webinar. What about flushing a pedigree blue to acute myostatin limousine or Charlie? Will I have height and weight? And you were saying this is something you're asked about quite regularly.
Yeah, again, look at it. I mean, none of these questions are out of the ordinary. I received a piece of advice long time ago when I started breeding cattle, and it still rings true to this day. You talk about height and you talk about muscle. You can put muscle into height. You can't put height into muscle. So if you're starting off with a low set, heavy muscled, you know, heifer, and you're hoping to breed a kind of slightly taller, more muscled heifer, you're going to struggle. Whereas if you start off with a good tall animal with muscle, you can certainly put more muscle into it. And you know, obviously the Q genes come very much into that. And it would be an area, going back to Billy's point there, but Carrick and the Winter Fair and other fat stock shows, you know, there's a lot of double Q and double Q heifers going up the road to those places. So you know, when it comes to your donor, if that's the type of calf that you're looking to breed, you have to start on a really solid platform with height. Crucial.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. And hopefully if anyone's up in Carrick next year, or well, probably the year after, we might see Billy up there as well with a heifer or a bull too. So look, we're running on there for 9:10 at this stage. So I'd like to sincerely thank David, Daire and Billy for coming on tonight and been so open and sharing your experiences and your knowledge with everyone on the call. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming on the call and for all the questions. We've over 50 questions in there. So I know we didn't get to all of them, but hopefully we answered a lot of them for you. And would like to wish you all a safe and successful breeding season in your own herds. But just before we finish up, I'd like to invite Martina Harrington on. She's our program manager, and she's just going to say a few words and do a final wrap up for us tonight.
Thanks a million, Aisling, and hi everybody. And I suppose all I wanted to do really is just to say, listen, thanks very much to all of the presenters for giving up their time and their effort, and for coming on for the last couple of nights. We've had 3 really successful webinars, a huge amount of information, and I hope you as a viewer found them informative, and that you have some messages or techniques that you can bring back onto your own farms, you know, that will be able to, I suppose, make life easier or improve your breeding. The recordings from tonight's presentation and from the previous 2 nights' presentations will be up on the FutureBeef websites. And what we're looking for really, I suppose, after the webinars is we're going to send you just a really short survey. There's just 5 very short questions on it that you'll be able to fill it up and just maybe give us a little bit of your feedback that will help us to improve the webinars for the future. And I suppose the other big thing for our side of things is that, like, we're managing a future beef program. It's Suckler Beef Farmers right across the country. And a lot of our farmers are using the technologies that we've talked about here tonight, and they have experience of it, and they can give a warts and all account of what's happening on their farms or what experience that they've had. And you can see those experiences either on our Future Beef website, which has the updates. We have a Future Beef newsletter that you can go onto the website and subscribe to. We have farm walks that are happening all the time over the country, and we have discussion groups that going in onto these farms. So if you see any of them in your locality, make sure to join them. I'd also, again, Aisling thanked our sponsors at the beginning, but without them, we wouldn't be able to run these webinars and we wouldn't have the farmers win the program. So I suppose nothing left to say, only thanks very much for coming on. Thanks to all of the presenters, and just to wish you a very successful breeding season. It's a very positive time in the beef industry for a change, so long may it last, and thanks very much, and good night.